She wasn't born into shame. No child ever is, but life is a way of deciding for you when you're poor, when you're alone, when you're a woman with no father to protect you and no husband to provide. In the ancient city of Jericho, behind walls so thick they seemed eternal, Rehab learned early that survival meant sacrifice. The scarlet curtain hanging in her doorway wasn't decoration. It was a signal, a mark. Men knew what it meant when they passed by. She was available. She was merchandise. She was something to use and forget every night. She painted her face. Not because she wanted to be beautiful, but because beauty was currency. Coins clinked on her table. Strangers left before dawn. And in the empty hours between darkness and light, Rehab stared at her cracked mirror and wondered, is this all I'll ever be? The city called her many names. Harlot, prostitute, woman of the night, but they never called her by the name that mattered most, daughter, beloved, chosen. She didn't know yet that heaven was watching, that her story wasn't ending in shame, it was only beginning. Because sometimes, the most broken vessels are exactly what God chooses to pour His glory through, and her redemption was already walking toward her door. Jericho was a fortress. Massive walls rose toward the sky, double-edged and impenetrable. For generations, no army had breached them. The city felt invincible, eternal, untouchable. But something had changed in the air. Whispers spread through the marketplace like wildfire. Traders from distant lands brought terrifying news. An entire nation was marching toward them. Not just any nation, the Israelites. The people of a God who did impossible things. They say their God split the Red Sea, one merchant muttered, eyes wide with fear. He drowned Pharaoh's entire army, another added, his voice trembling. Kings have fallen before them. Cities have crumbled. Rehab listened from behind her veil, pretending to shop for bread. But her heart pounded with something unfamiliar. Fear, yes. But also, curiosity. All her life, she'd known the gods of Jericho, cold stone idols that demanded sacrifice but gave nothing back. Silent, powerless, empty. But this God moved. He acted. He saved His people that night. Alone in her room, Rehab whispered into the darkness, if you're real, if you see people like me, maybe there's hope. She didn't know it yet, but that prayer had been heard and heaven was already answering. The rain came sudden and violent, pounding the streets of Jericho. Lightning split the sky. Rehab sat by her window, watching water pour through the cracks in the stone walls. The city felt different tonight. Tense. Afraid. Then came the knock, not the usual slow, deliberate knock of a customer. This was frantic, desperate, urgent. She hesitated. Her hand hovered over the door latch. Another knock, harder this time. Please, a voice hissed through the wood. Open. They are coming. Against every instinct screaming danger, Rehab pulled the door open. Two men stumbled inside, drenched and gasping for breath. Mud caked their clothes. Blood smeared one man's face. Their eyes darted toward the street, wild with terror. Who are you? Rehab demanded, her voice low. The taller one met her gaze. Spies. From the Israelite camp. The king's soldiers are hunting us. They'll kill us if they find us. Her blood turned cold. Harboring enemy spies was treason. The punishment was death, slow, public, brutal. She should turn them in. Collect the reward. Stay safe. But something stirred deep inside her chest. A voice she couldn't ignore. Upstairs, she whispered. Now. And with that single word, her entire destiny shifted. Footsteps thundered through the streets. Torches blazed in the rain. Rehab's heart hammered as she led the spies to her rooftop. Stalks of flax lay drying there, tall, thick, perfect for hiding. Get under, she commanded. Don't move. Don't breathe. They obeyed without question, disappearing beneath the plants moments later. Fists pounded on her door. Rehab descended the stairs, forcing herself to breathe slowly. Stay calm. You've lied to men before. This is no different. She opened the door. 3 soldiers stood there, weapons drawn. The commander's eyes were hard as stone. The king sent us. 2 Israelite spies entered this house tonight. Where are they? Rehab met his gaze without flinching. Yes, men came here earlier. But I didn't know where they were from. The commander stepped closer. Where? They. They left before the city gates closed. she said smoothly. If you hurry, you might catch them on the road. Silence. The commander studied her face, searching for any crack in her story. Rehab forced a small smile. Why would I protect enemies of Jericho? I have no loyalty to strangers. Finally, he nodded. Move out. The soldiers rushed toward the gates. Rehab closed the door and collapsed against it, trembling above, hidden beneath the flax. 2 lives hung by the thread of her courage. The city fell silent. The soldiers were gone. Rehab climbed back to the rooftop, her legs shaking. Rain still dripped from the edges of the stalks. They are gone, she whispered. The 2 men emerged slowly, eyes full of disbelief. You saved us, the younger one said. Why? Rehab turned away, staring at the dark horizon beyond Jericho's walls. Because I know who you save. The taller spy frowned. What do you mean? She faced them, and for the first time in years, her voice carried something other than practiced seduction. It carried truth. I know the Lord has given you this land. Everyone in Jericho is terrified. We've heard what he did at the Red Sea, how he dried it up so you could cross. We heard how you destroyed kings on the other side of the Jordan. Her voice cracked. When we heard it, our hearts melted. No one has courage left. Because the Lord your God, he is God in heaven above and on earth below. Tears slipped down her cheeks. I've spent my whole life serving dead gods. Stone idols that can't see, can't hear, can't save. But your God, he's real. The spies stood speechless. This woman, this prostitute, had just declared faith more powerful than Israel's priests, and heaven was listening. The younger spy stepped forward. We owe you our lives. Then swear to me, Rehab said urgently. Swear by your God. When your army comes, you'll spare me and my family. The 2 men exchanged glances. Then the taller one nodded. We swear it. Our lives for yours. He pulled something from his belt, a length of scarlet cord. When we attack, tie this rope from your window. Make sure your family is inside this house. Don't let anyone leave. Rehab took the cord, her fingers trembling. It was the same deep red as the curtain in her doorway. The same color that had marked her shame for years. Everyone inside will be safe, the spy continued. But anyone who steps outside, we can't protect them. And if you tell anyone about us, the deal is void. I won't tell, Rehab promised. I swear it. The taller spy studied her face. You have more faith than most of Israel. May your God remember that. Your God, she corrected softly. He's mine now too. Something shifted in the air. Invisible. Eternal. The spies prepared to leave, lowering themselves down the outer wall on the same scarlet rope. As they disappeared into the night, Rehab held the cord close to her chest. What once marked her sin would now mark her salvation. Morning came too quickly. Rehab woke to the sound of merchants shouting, soldiers marching, life continuing as if the world hadn't shifted last night. She hid the scarlet rope beneath her bed, her hands still shaking from the memory. What have I done? She'd committed treason, protected enemies, lied to the king's men that if anyone discovered the truth, she'd be dragged through the streets and stoned to death. But another voice whispered deeper. You chose faith over fear. You chose life over survival. Outside her window, Jericho bustled with false confidence. The walls stood tall. The gates remained locked. People laughed and traded, convinced their fortress was unbreakable. But Rehab knew better. That she'd seen the terror in the soldiers' eyes when they spoke of Israel's God. She'd heard the tremor in the king's voice. Jericho was already defeated. They just didn't know it yet. That afternoon, she walked through the marketplace, listening. The Israelites are camped just beyond the Jordan, someone said. Let them come, another scoffed. These walls have stood for centuries. No army can break them. Rehab said nothing, but that night, she tied the scarlet rope to her window frame and whispered into the darkness, God of Israel, I'm trusting you now. Don't forget me. And far beyond the walls, an army prepared to march. Days passed. The city grew more anxious. Rehab's neighbors began to notice things. Why were men at your house that night? One woman asked, eyes narrow with suspicion. Just travelers, Rehab lied smoothly. They needed shelter from the rain. But the questions didn't stop. Strange travelers, another muttered, coming during a time of war. Rehab felt the walls closing in, not Jericho's stone walls, but walls of suspicion, distrust, danger. Every knock on her door made her flinch. Every shadow in the street looked like a soldier coming to arrest her. At night, she lay awake, heart racing. What if they find out? What if the spies never return? What if I trusted the wrong God? Guilt and faith warred inside her soul like two armies clashing. Part of her wanted to rip down the scarlet rope, pretend none of it happened, go back to the life she knew, empty but safe. But another part of her, deeper, stronger, refused to let go. That she'd felt something that night on the rooftop. Something real. Not the cold touch of stone gods, but the warm presence of someone who actually saw her. Someone who knew her name. Someone who didn't define her by her past. So she kept the rope tied, kept her faith burning, and waited for heaven to move. Then came the summons. That a soldier appeared at her door, his face grim. The king demands your presence. Now. Rahab's blood turned to ice. She followed him through the streets, feeling every eye on her. Whispers followed like shadows. The palace loomed ahead, massive, cold, intimidating inside. King Og sat on his throne, his expression dark with suspicion. Advisors flanked him on both sides. Rahab, the king said slowly. You run a establishment near the eastern wall. Yes. Yes, my lord. And on the night of the storm, 2 men entered your home. Her heart hammered. Travelers seeking shelter, my lord. Nothing more. Travelers. The king leaned forward. Or spies. Silence filled the room like poison. Rahab forced herself to meet his gaze. I don't know what they were, my lord. They came, they left. I asked no questions. One advisor stepped forward. The guard said you told them the men left before the gates closed. That's correct. Then why, the king growled, did witnesses see shadows on your rooftop after the gates were locked? Rahab's mind raced. Stay calm. Don't break. Perhaps they saw the flax moving in the wind, my lord. I was drying stalks that night. The king studied her for what felt like eternity. Finally, he waved his hand. Go. But know this, if I discover you've lied, your life is forfeit. Rahab bowed and left outside. She gasped for air that was too close. That night, Rahab couldn't sleep. She stood by her window, staring at the scarlet rope fluttering in the breeze. It looked so fragile, so small against the massive stone walls surrounding her. Can a piece of rope really save me? Doubt crept in like fog. What if the spies forgot their promise? What if they died before reaching their camp? What if Israel's army never came? She'd risked everything on the word of 2 strangers and the reputation of a God she'd never met. Was I a fool? She whispered into the night. But then she remembered the spy's words. The Lord your God. He is God in heaven above and on earth below. Not might be God. Not could be God. God present. Active. Real. Rahab closed her eyes and made a choice. I'm trusting you, she said aloud. Not because I understand. Not because I'm sure. But because I have nowhere else to go. You're my only hope. The wind picked up, and the scarlet rope danced against the stone. It looked like a heartbeat. A promise. A covenant written in red far beyond the walls. In the camp of Israel, 2 spies knelt before their commander and reported, the whole land is melting in fear because of us. And there's a woman in Jericho. She has more faith than anyone we've met. The commander's name was Joshua, and he was already planning the impossible. Dawn broke over Jericho from her window. Rahab saw something that made her breath catch. An army, not rushing toward the walls with battering rams and siege towers. Not shouting war cries or firing arrows, just walking. Thousands of Israelites circled the city in complete silence. Priests carried a golden box, the Ark of the Covenant. Trumpets sounded, long and haunting. Then they simply walked away. The people of Jericho watched from the walls, confused. What kind of attack is that? Someone laughed nervously. But Rahab didn't laugh. She recognized the strategy. Not human warfare, but divine. This wasn't a battle of swords. It was a battle of faith. Day 2 came. The Israelites circled again. Silent. Steady. Unstoppable. Day 3. Day 4. Day 5. Jericho's confidence began to crack. Why do they keep circling? People muttered. What are they waiting for? Inside her house, Rahab gathered her family, her father, mother, brothers, sisters. They crowded into her small room, eyes wide with fear. Why are we here? Her father demanded. What's happening? Rehab pointed to the scarlet rope. See that? When this city falls, that rope will save us. But only if we stay inside. You've gone mad, her brother said. Maybe, Rehab replied. But I'd rather be mad with faith than sane with fear. Outside, the army marched and heaven counted down to miracle. The seventh day arrived. Rehab woke before dawn, her body tense with anticipation. Something was different today. She could feel it in the air, electric, heavy, charged with divine presence. Her family huddled together, their faces pale. The scarlet rope hung from the window, vivid against the gray stone. Stay close, Rehab whispered. Don't go near the door. Don't look outside. Then the sound began. Footsteps. Thousands of them. Marching once around the city. Twice. 3 times. Rehab counted each circle, her heart pounding faster with every pass. Point 4. 5. 6. On the 7th circle, the trumpets bled. Louder, longer, piercing the sky like the voice of God himself. Then came the shout, not just soldiers shouting. The entire nation of Israel released a unified roar that shook the very foundations of the earth, and the walls began to tremble. Get down! Rehab screamed, pulling her family to the floor. The ground bucked beneath them. Stone groaned. Dust exploded into the air. Her mother sobbed. Her father clutched his chest. Her siblings screamed. But Rehab held onto the scarlet rope with both hands, her eyes squeezed shut, her voice lifting above the chaos. God of Israel, you promised. You promised. Then the world split apart. The walls of Jericho, impenetrable for generations, crumbled like sand. Everything fell except the section where a scarlet rope hung from a window. Silence. Dust hung in the air like a shroud. The once mighty walls of Jericho lay in ruins. Massive stones toppled, gates shattered, towers collapsed into rubble. Screams echoed through the destruction. Fire spread. Chaos reigned. But in one small corner, one impossible section, a house remained standing. Rehab opened her eyes slowly. Her ears rang from the deafening crash. Her body shook uncontrollably. Are we alive? Her sister whispered. Rehab looked around. The walls of her room stood firm. The ceiling hadn't collapsed. The floor beneath them was solid. She crawled to the window and looked out, and gasped. Everything around them was destroyed. Jericho had been obliterated. But her house, perched on the very wall that had fallen, stood untouched. The scarlet rope still swayed gently in the wind. It worked, she breathed. It actually worked. Her father stared in disbelief. Your God, not just my God, Rehab said, tears streaming down her face. Our God, the God who saves. Through the smoke and dust, she saw movement, soldiers in unfamiliar armor, advancing through the rubble. Israelites. And at the front, 2 familiar faces. The spies. They were searching, looking, keeping their promise. Point. One of them spotted the scarlet rope and pointed. There. That's the house. They ran toward her, and Rehab knew redemption had arrived, not because she deserved it, but because grace never asks if you deserve it just gives. The soldiers reached her door. The taller spy, his face covered in dust but his eyes warm with recognition, called out, Rehab, are you safe? Yes, she shouted back. My family is here. Come out, he said. It's over. You're free. Rehab hesitated. Freedom. Such a strange, unfamiliar word. She looked at her family, still trembling, still in shock. Come on, she urged. We're leaving. They stumbled out into the ruins, stepping over broken stone and shattered gates. Jericho was gone. Completely. The city that once seemed eternal had been erased in moments. But Rehab didn't mourn it. Everything she'd known, the shame, the hopelessness, the empty nights, was buried beneath the rubble. And she was glad. The younger spy approached her. Joshua, our commander, wants to see you. She followed them through the Israelite camp, her family close behind. People stared. Whispers followed. That's the woman from Jericho. The prostitute who helped the spies. Why is she here? Rehab lifted her chin. Let them whisper. She knew what she'd been. But she also knew what she was becoming. Joshua stood at the center of camp, tall, strong, his presence commanding respect. When he saw Rehab, he didn't look at her with judgment or disgust. He looked at her with honor. You saved my men, he said simply, and you declared faith in our God. You are welcome among us. Tears filled her eyes. Thank you. Joshua nodded. Your old life is gone. Your new life begins now. And Rehab believed him. The first nights among Israel were strange. Rehab lay on unfamiliar ground, staring at unfamiliar stars, surrounded by unfamiliar sounds. Everything she'd known was ash. Everyone she'd feared was dead. The walls that once imprisoned her were dust. She should have felt relief, freedom, joy, but instead, she felt lost. During the day, she helped set up camp, carried water, prepared food. She tried to blend in, to disappear into the crowd, but the stares followed her everywhere. That's a harlot from Jericho, women whispered, pulling their children closer. She slept with our enemies, men muttered, shaking their heads. Rehab pretended not to hear. But each word carved deeper into her heart. One evening, a group of women gathered at the well. When Rehab approached, they fell silent. May I draw water? She asked quietly. One woman stepped aside without speaking. But her eyes said everything. You don't belong here. Rehab filled her jar and walked away, her throat tight with unshed tears. That night, alone in her tent, she whispered into the darkness, God, you saved me from Jericho. But did you save me just to be an outcast here too? I thought redemption meant a new beginning. But everywhere I go, people only see my past. Does anyone see me the way you do? Outside, the wind carried her prayer toward heaven, and someone was already preparing an answer. Days turned into weeks. Rehab woke each morning with a hollow ache in her chest. Saved, yes. Safe, yes. But still alone. She watched families laugh together, saw children play, observed men and women walking side by side, hands intertwined, and she wondered if she'd ever be anything more than the woman from Jericho. One afternoon, while carrying water from the well, she stumbled. The jar slipped from her hands and shattered on the ground. Water pooled in the dust. Rehab knelt, trying desperately to gather the pieces, her hands shaking. I'm sorry, she whispered, though no one was listening. I'm so sorry. Then a shadow fell across her. She looked up, expecting anger, judgment, another reminder that she didn't belong, but instead, she saw kindness. A man knelt beside her. He was tall, strong, with gentle eyes and calloused hands. He didn't speak at first, just helped her gather the broken pieces. Accidents happen, he said simply. Rehab stared at him. No condemnation, no disgust, just compassion. I'm Salmon, he introduced himself. From the tribe of Judah. I'm Rehab. I know who you are. Her heart sank. Of course he does. Everyone knows. But then he said something she didn't expect. You're the woman who chose faith over fear, who risked everything to protect God's people. He smiled. That's courage. And in that moment, Rehab felt something she'd never felt before. Seen. Not for what she'd done in the past, but for who she'd become through faith. After that day, Salmon appeared often. He'd find Rehab at the well, offer to carry her water. He'd sit with her family during evening meals, asking her father about his life in Jericho. At first, Rehab kept her distance. She'd learned long ago that kindness for men always came with a price. But Salmon was different. He never asked for anything, never looked at her with hunger or expectation. He just listened. One evening, they sat together under a canopy of stars. Why are you kind to me? Rehab asked quietly. Everyone else avoids me. Salmon was silent for a moment. Then he said, Do you know the story of my people? How God brought us out of Egypt? I've heard pieces. We were slaves, Salmon explained. Beaten, broken, worthless in the eyes of the world. But God saw us. He didn't wait until we were perfect. He didn't demand we clean ourselves up first. He saved us while we were still covered in the mud of slavery. He turned to face her. Your past doesn't scare me, Rehab. Because my past is full of people who were broken too. Liars, murderers, cowards. But God used them anyway. Rehab's eyes filled with tears. I don't know if I'll ever feel worthy. Neither do I, Salmon said honestly. But maybe that's the point. Grace isn't about being worthy. It's about being loved anyway. Something shifted between them. Invisible. Sacred. I see you, Salmon whispered. Not the prostitute. Not the outcast. I see the woman who trusted God when it cost her everything. And Rehab believed him. Months passed. Seasons changed, Salmon and Rehab became inseparable. He taught her about Israel's God, not the distant deity she'd imagined, but a father who pursued the lost, redeemed the broken, transformed the forgotten. She told him about her life in Jericho, the shame, the pain, the emptiness. Things she'd never spoken aloud. And he never flinched, never pulled away, just held her hand and listened. One evening, as the sun set over the camp, Salmon led her to a quiet place overlooking the valley. "Rehab," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "I need to ask you something." Her heart raced. "I know your past. I know what people say about you. I know you think you're unworthy." He took both her hands in his. "But I don't see a prostitute. I see a hero. I see a woman of faith. I see someone God loves, and someone I love too." Tears streamed down Rehab's face. "Will you marry me?" Salmon asked. "Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving to you that you're worthy?" Rehab couldn't speak. Her throat was too tight, her heart too full. "I'm not," she started. "Don't say you're not worthy," Salmon interrupted gently. "None of us are. That's what makes grace so beautiful." She looked into his eyes, kind, steady, sure, and she nodded. "Yes." Under a canopy of stars, surrounded by the camp of a people who had once been slaves, two broken people became whole together, not because they were perfect, but because they were loved. The wedding was simple but beautiful. Rehab wore a robe of white, a symbol of new beginnings, not earned but given. Salmon stood beside her, his hand steady in his. The priest recited blessings. The community gathered, some still skeptical, others beginning to see what God had done. When it was over, Salmon whispered in her ear, "You're not defined by where you came from. You're defined by where you're going." Rehab believed him. Time passed. Seasons turned. And one morning, Rehab woke with a feeling she'd never experienced before, life stirring inside her. She placed a hand on her stomach, tears streaming down her face. "A child," she whispered. "I'm going to have a child." When she told Salmon, his face lit up with joy. "A son or daughter," he said in awe. "Our child." But it was more than that. This child would carry forward the faith of a woman who'd been redeemed. The courage of a mother who'd chosen God over fear. Months later, Rehab gave birth to a son. Strong, healthy, perfect. She held him close, studying his tiny face. "What will we name him?" she asked. Salmon smiled. "Boaz. It means in him is strength." Rehab kissed her son's forehead. "Boaz," she whispered, "you will be a man of honor, a man of God." She didn't know yet that her son would one day marry a Moabite widow named Ruth. She didn't know a grandson would be named Obed. She didn't know a great-grandson would be King David. But heaven knew, and the scarlet thread of her redemption was being woven into eternity. Years passed. Boaz grew into a man of integrity. Just as Rehab had prayed, she watched him work the fields with honor, treat workers with kindness, follow God with unwavering faith. "He's just like his father," Salmon said one evening, his hair now streaked with gray. "He's better than both of us," Rehab replied, smiling. One day, the scarlet rope, now faded and worn, hung on the wall of their home. Rehab's grandchildren asked about it. "Grandmother, what is this old rope?" Rehab took it down gently, running her fingers over the frayed threads. "This," she said softly, "is the symbol of the day God saved me." She told them the story, not the sanitized version, but the truth, the fear, the shame, the impossible choice, the falling walls, the redemption. "You are a prostitute?" one grandchild asked innocently. "Yes," Rehab said without hesitation. "But I didn't stay one. God doesn't leave us where we are. He transforms us into who we were meant to be." "What does the red mean?" Rehab smiled. "It means that what once marked my shame became the sign of my salvation. It means God redeems. He doesn't erase your story, He rewrites it." The children listened, wide-eyed. "Remember this," Rehab continued. "You're never too broken for God to use. Never too lost to be found. Never too stained to be washed clean." She hung the rope back on the wall. "That's what grace looks like." And they never forgot. Word of Rehab's story spread throughout Israel. She was no longer whispered about in shame. Now, her name was spoken with reverence. The woman who saved the spies. The prostitute who became a mother in Israel. The foreigner who showed more faith than many born into the covenant. Elders sought her counsel. Young women came to her for wisdom. Families invited her to bless their homes. Rehab never pretended to be perfect. She never hid her past. I was lost, she'd say simply, but God found me. One evening, a young woman approached her, tears streaming down her face. I've done terrible things, the girl confessed. Things I'm ashamed of. Can God ever forgive me? Rehab took the girl's hands. Listen to me carefully. Your past does not define your future. God's grace is bigger than your mistakes. I know, because I've lived it. But how do I start over? You already have, Rehab said gently. The moment you cried out to God, you started over. Now you just keep walking forward, one step at a time. The girl left with hope in her eyes. Salmon watched from a distance, smiling. You've become a mother to more than just Boaz. Rehab looked at the women gathered around her, women seeking hope, seeking redemption, seeking to know if God could love them too. Maybe that's why God saved me, she said quietly. Not just for my sake, but for theirs. So they'd know grace is real. Decades passed. Rehab grew old, her hair silver, her hands wrinkled but still strong. She lived to see her great-grandchildren, to hear stories of Boaz's kindness echoing through Israel, to watch Ruth, a Moabite widow, marry into a family with the same courage Rehab once displayed. She's just like you, Salmon said, watching Ruth work the fields. An outsider who chose faith. Rehab smiled. God loves outsiders. One day, scribes came to Rahab's home. We're recording the genealogies of Israel's great families, they explained. You are part of a lineage that matters. Me? Rehab asked, surprised. Yes. Your son Boaz married Ruth. Their son is Obed. And Obed's son is a boy named Jesse, who some believe will father great kings. Rahab's breath caught. Kings. The scribe nodded. Your name will be written in the sacred records. Not as a footnote, but as a foundation. After they left, Rehab sat in silence, overwhelmed. From prostitute to matriarch, Salmon whispered, taking her hand. Not just a matriarch, Rehab corrected, her voice full of wonder. A testimony. Living proof that God doesn't just use the righteous. He uses the redeemed. Years later, scribes would trace the family tree of Israel's greatest king, David, and there, written clearly in the royal line, was a name the world tried to forget but heaven refused to erase. Rehab, the prostitute who became a hero, the outcast who became a mother of kings, the woman who proved grace is greater than shame. Generations passed. Centuries turned. The story of Rehab was told around fires, taught to children, remembered in prayers. But the story wasn't finished. In a small town called Bethlehem, a lineage continued. From Rehab to Boaz to Obed to Jesse to David, the shepherd boy who became king. David's descendants ruled Israel. Some were righteous. Some were broken. But through them all, a scarlet thread wove invisibly through history. Prophets spoke of a coming Messiah. A king who would reign forever. A savior who would redeem not just Israel, but the entire world. And in the genealogies carefully preserved by scribes, 5 women were listed, unusual in ancient records that typically only named men. Tamar, Rehab, Ruth, Bathsheba, Mary. Women with scandal in their stories. Women who shouldn't have belonged. Women whose inclusion seemed like mistakes. But heaven makes no mistakes. Rahab's name sat there, permanent and honored, in the royal line leading to the throne of David. And the scribes who wrote it understood, God was making a statement. I use the unlikely. I redeem the broken. I write my greatest stories through the people the world discards. The scarlet thread that saved Rehab in Jericho was being woven into something far greater than she ever imagined. A thread that would one day be stained with divine blood. A thread that would tear the veil between heaven and earth. A thread that would offer salvation to every person who'd ever felt too broken, too stained, too lost to be saved. The story wasn't just about Rehab anymore. It was about redemption itself. Centuries after Rahab's death, in the same region where Jericho once stood, another moment unfolded. A young virgin named Mary received an impossible message from an angel. You will bear a son. He will be called the Son of the Most High. Mary, like Rehab, had a choice. Faith or fear. Trust or doubt. I am the Lord's servant, Mary said. Let it be to me according to your word. And the Messiah, promised for generations, took flesh in her womb. When Jesus was born, scribes traced his genealogy. Matthew the tax collector wrote it down carefully, including the names of women who proved God's grace. Salmon, the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rehab. There it was. Permanent. Undeniable. The prostitute from Jericho was an ancestor of Jesus Christ. The woman who hung a scarlet rope in her window was part of the bloodline that would hang on a cross. Jesus grew up knowing these stories. He knew about Rahab's courage, Ruth's loyalty, Tamar's desperate faith. And when he began his ministry, he sought out the outcasts, the prostitutes, the tax collectors, the sinners. I didn't come for the righteous, he said. I came for the broken. He touched lepers, dined with betrayers, forgave adulterers, because he carried Rahab's faith in his lineage. The same grace that saved a prostitute in Jericho now walked the earth in human form, offering redemption to anyone who'd reach for it. The scarlet rope became a scarlet cross, and salvation was offered to all. The story of Rehab doesn't end in ancient history. It echoes through every generation, through every person who's ever felt too broken to be loved, too stained to be clean, too lost to be found. Her scarlet rope still hangs in the windows of human hearts, a symbol that grace reaches into the darkest rooms and pulls us into light. You might feel like Rehab today, trapped behind walls you didn't build, defined by choices you regret, marked by a past you can't erase. But listen carefully. Your past does not define your destiny. God doesn't wait until you're cleaned up to save you. He meets you in the mess, in the shame, in the fear, and he offers the same thing he offered Rehab. A choice.
Will you tie the scarlet rope in your window? Will you trust that grace is greater than guilt? Will you believe that the God who redeemed a prostitute in Jericho can redeem you too? Rahab's courage changed history. Her faith echoed through generations. Her story became part of the greatest story ever told. And your story? It's not finished either. Maybe you're reading this because you need to know. God sees you. Not your mistakes. Not your shame. You. The walls around you might feel unbreakable, but God specializes in impossible rescues. Rehab didn't save herself. She just reached for grace. And grace did the rest. So reach. Trust. Believe. Because the same God who saved her is offering you the same scarlet thread. And when you take it, everything changes. Your story of redemption begins now.